Hello and welcome to the Lines on the Map podcast by the Amargi. I am Sushobhan, your host. In this podcast, we take a deeper look at the issues covered by our team of journalists and talk with them about their ins and outs. In this episode, we speak to editor Jîl Şwanî about his upcoming book, the magical realism that his book draws upon, Kurdish mythology, and the place of Kurdish mythology in shaping Kurdish identity. Jîl Şwanî, welcome to the show and thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to this podcast as something that is a little, in Hindi, we call it a little hatke, a little moved from what we usually do. But I think it is just as important. So, Jîl, maybe you can start by introducing yourself. Tell us who you are.
Okay, I think you're way too generous saying we all know you, but I like the compliment. My name is Jîl Şwanî. I'm a writer. I'm also an editor here with the Amargi. I am somewhat obsessed with literature, magical realism, and mythology. And I also write satirical pieces from time to time, what some people might call smart-ass articles. So that's who I am.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot for that. Yes, as someone who reads those smart ass articles from time to time, I must say they are very, very good. And I hope you keep on doing it more and more. But here, we are here today for something a little more different from your smart ass articles. And we want to discuss a very exciting thing which I learned about, and that is your book, or at least your upcoming book, for which I'm sure we're all very uh, enthusiastic. I'm going to not take more space from you or more time from you. Please tell us about your book, how you came across the idea, what it is about, and also maybe hints towards how we can place pre-orders as well.
Well, so the book, the working title is "My Name Is a Dream." That is, it's actually a reference to a poem by a Kurdish poet Sherko Bekas. I'll get into that later if you'd like to, but it's not quite ready for pre-orders yet. It's still in the process of being sent out to agents to publishing houses, so we'll see how that goes. But the idea basically is. As I was saying, I am obsessed with magical realism, with mythology. I love Kurdish mythology, and I love that we have certain Kurdish authors like Bakhtiar Ali who have written magical realism. Um, but I thought I want to do something. I want to write a story that is filled with the sort of the magical things that I grew up learning about, the stories that I grew up learning about, but that also is rooted in reality. Which I mean, I don't mean to be making a pun here. It's like magical realism, but that is what it ended up being. And the political reality of Kurdistan, the lived reality of Kurdistan, can be very dark, and that is what grounds the story. The stories, the myths that I grew up with, that is what sort of gives color to the story. But just to put it shortly, it's essentially about brothers and sisters and families and how they try to survive in the face of tragic, horrible things happening. That is essentially the story. But yeah, we can get into it more if you like.
How much is it based upon your lived realities? Does it draw much, or is the plot something you have been working on for some time now?
I suppose part of it is okay. So yeah, there are things that I've taken from my own life. One of the scenes that are in the very beginning of the book um, is the one of the protagonists goes up to the antagonist, uh, and the antagonist is the son of this powerful politician, and he basically uses all his power and the guards in front of his house to humiliate and beat up the kid, the protagonist. Now that has never happened to me, thankfully, But I do remember this one time where I was in Kurdistan and I was walking with my friends, and then I get a phone call, and I tell my friends, "Hey, you guys walk ahead. I'll just take the phone call." And we're walking in this neighborhood in front of these houses. So I'm just stood there talking, and then this guard comes up to me with a rifle, and he's like, "Who are you? What are you doing here?"
Wow.
And I'm like, I, hi, my name is Jîl. Who are you? I'm just walking here. And then he's like, "You're not supposed to stand here. Keep walking." And I look around and I realize I'm standing in front of this mansion. Um, and I was a stupid teenager, so I was like, "This fucking guy, you know." And my friends kind of hold me back and they pull me away, and my friend apologizes to the guard for me. But thankfully, nothing happened out of that, right? Initially,
Yeah.
but these are the things that you know can happen very randomly.
Yeah.
But the novel gets a lot darker than my own experiences. Yeah.
Okay. I want to address something you spoke about just in the last answer, where you said that the realities in Kurdistan can sometimes be dark. Um, do you envision what you do, or even magical realism, as a sort of escapism, as something that people can read for some time just to get away from the day to day darkness that they face?
In a sense, you can say that, yeah, because magical realism is essentially a genre of literature and art that blends what is fantastical with reality. And I think it's quite interesting how that came to be. It does take some inspiration from German surrealism, German surreal theater, and paintings. But what it really came out of was in Latin America, a lot of people wanted to express who they are. But the issue was one, colonization made it impossible for them to be who they are.
Hmm.
And the other part of that is, for example, the writers who wanted to write stories wanted to write something that really represented them, their native and indigenous experiences, but they couldn't. Either they could write a whitewashed story, or they had to write a story where it would talk about the horrible realities that may be interesting to some people, but it would not be very interesting to many others who might see it as too dark. So what ended up happening was they created this in-between place. Uh, this in-between place where um, the native could be both native and could also be the colonizer. And they use old mythologies, stories from before colonization, or stories native to those cultures, to highlight the absurdity of colonialism, right? Uh, so, for example, you have a colonial state coming in, controlling your people, your land, your resources. And at the same time, they tell you, no, 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 but we put human rights first. And so they would take that essential thing. Let me tell you a story, actually, not my story, but Gabriel Garcia Marquez's story. In
Yeah.
100 Years of Solitude, he talks about how when the workers were protesting to be paid not in coupons, but in actual money, the banana company that is controlling all the economic movement in that place, the banana company starts cracking down, and then a lot of the workers who are protesting get taken to jail, and the people in jail don't, like, the Colombian government don't want to spend money on feeding the jailed protesters,
Hmm.
and the banana company doesn't want to spend money on feeding the protesters, so they end up just releasing them because they don't want, like, that's sort of the silliness, the absurdity of
Hmm.
colonialism that magical realism sometimes highlights. And that is more of a grounded thing, but there's more fantastical elements to it in other stories. Yeah.
You spoke about how magical realism, as such, leans into or takes the help of ancient myths and uh, mythologies um, that are rooted in the native culture. Uh, do you do that as well in your book and in your general writings?
Yeah, I love doing that. You know, when you're watching a movie or when you're reading a book or whatever you're doing or playing a video game, and you find a little Easter egg that is not really supposed to be there, but
Mhm,
it's like then you see it, I'm like, oh my God, this person who created it also. I love doing that. I love putting little Easter eggs into the story, and there's like a lot of those. But so in this novel, there's this little fox that is just around the neighborhood that people treat as a little cat, and I love that idea because I grew up hearing so many stories about the cunning fox from Kurdish folklore.
mhm, mhm,
But also the whole book is based on, or not based on, but it takes so much inspiration from one Kurdish myth called the Papuk bird, which is these brother and sister whose mother dies, and then their father remarries, and the stepmother is very mean to them. That's a typical story,
mhm,
right? We've heard that so much. And then one day, the stepmother sends the brother and sister out to the mountainside and tells them to collect tumble thistles. It's like to take home and cook or boil or whatever to eat. And they're very terrified of the stepmother. They're terrified of how she's going to react if they say no. So she gives them a bag. Then they go up to the mountains and they start finding thistles and they start taking it. Around noontime, the brother, the younger one of the two siblings, asks his sister, "Can I have one of the thistles? I'm really hungry." And she's like, "Yeah, yeah, of course you can have one." And he eats one, and they continue working into the evening. And by evening time, as it's getting dark and they're walking down the hill back towards their home, she realizes the bag is empty. And if the bag is empty and they go home with an empty bag, God knows what is going to happen to them. So they start blaming each other. The sister says, it's your fault. You ate all the thistles, and now we're going to go home and she's going to kill us. And the brother, being so scared, both of the sister and also of the stepmother, it's like, no, no, I promise it wasn't. Cut open my stomach, and you'll see there's only one thistle in there. So, out of desperation, again, mind you, this is an old mythological story, but out of desperation, she cuts his belly open and sees there was only one, and the boy of course dies, and she is just shattered, broken. She washes brother's body with her tears, buries him in the mountains, and then looks up to the sky and begs God, please make me a bird. Please make me a bird so that every springtime I can come back and sing my brother's name. And so every spring in the mountains, when the birds are back singing on the branches, this is the story that you may hear. This is the sister coming back singing her brother's name. So that gave a lot of inspiration to the novel. And there's other stories as well. There's like Shamaran that is quite popular. There's there's these old stories about how trees in Kurdistan hold the spirits of ancestors. That plays a role in it as well. So there's a lot of these things in it.
Are these stories those that you sort of grew up with, or did you actually go on your like on a search for these stories? In the sense, are these things you actively hunted for and then use that to inspire your own story, or is it or are these stories you always knew from your childhood?
Some of them I knew, but some of them I had to go looking for. Like the papuk bird was not something. It's native to the Zazaki speaking Kurds in Dersim, and it's also available in some variations in Kurmanji Kurdish, but it's not native to the Sorani areas, which is the Sorani speaking areas, which is where I'm from. Some of them I grew up hearing, and then when I had to go look for these stories, I actually found it's really hard to find Kurdish mythologies. Like you can find them in Kurdistan looking bookstores, But if you don't have access to Kurdish libraries, it's really difficult. So, and the issue with that is, one, Kurdish culture has not been served as much as the countries around us. In part, it's because Kurdish is, of course, repressed. In part, is because, for example, mythology plays a great role in national identity, right? You look at the Greeks, and nobody doubts Greek history, and
Yeah,
Greek
yeah.
mythology plays a role in that. Same with the Romans. Everybody knows, even though the Romans don't exist as the Romans now, Roman mythology still plays a role in Western culture and even, non-Western culture. And so in Kurdistan, a lot of these stories have been like appropriated. So a few years ago, for example, Netflix made Shamaran as a Turkish TV show. And what that does is it can, at least to a mainstream audience, at least someone who watches that show, take that away from Kurdish identity and Kurdish history. But what I'm trying to do now is bring back these stories. Last week, I published a story on my Substack about Deus, and the Deo was something I grew up hearing about. I knew it was this big hairy monster, but I never quite knew what it was. And so as I grew up and I started reading more about it, I realized Deo actually comes from the old stories, from the old mythologies, from before Kurds were Muslim. In those stories, Deos were these demon-like creatures. And before they were demon-like creatures, they were deities, they were gods. And the word Deo itself shares roots with Dios and Zeus and Deva in Hinduism as well. So, but because we don't have a lot of these resources, if you don't have access to Kurdish libraries, it can be really difficult to find. And that's something I want to work on and change now.
Is this your first book that you are writing?
No. It's I wrote my first book when I was 15.
Wow. Okay.
I had nothing else to do, and so I just sat down and started writing. And of course, it didn't go well because what does a 15-year-old know about the world? But at the time, I thought it was the breakthrough. I thought I was going to change the world. But I wrote that and it didn't go well. And then I started writing short stories because I was like, if I enjoy doing this, and I clearly I do, I wrote a whole fucking book. Oh, sorry for the cursing, by the way. I don't know.
No worries. It's all good.
I wrote a whole book. Clearly I enjoy it. I gotta get better at this. So I started writing short stories, and then after those short stories, I started writing more books. So all in all, this is the 7th book that I write, the
Wow.
5th that I finish, like complete. And yeah, that answered the question. I feel like I went
That
on
is
a
for
big
sure. That
tangent.
is. But let me ask you, like, do you hold on to magical realism as a theme across your books? Is that something you employ frequently?
Uh, Funny enough, it wasn't something that I really thought about or even was aware of a few years ago. Like I knew stories like this existed. I didn't know it was a whole genre. And I didn't know the history behind it.
Mhm.
The history being colonized people trying to express their culture and their grievances and just write stories. But I I'll tell you the story of how I came across magical realism without realizing I'm writing magical realism. I read this story once about Christopher Hitchens, which when I was younger I really enjoyed listening to and reading. And one of the stories I read about him was one day he was out with his friends drinking from like 12 p.m. until
Mhm.
12 a.m., 12 hours of drinking. And then he goes home and he writes a 5,000 word essay. And then that essay gets published. And Christopher Hitchens,
Yeah.
one day I was hanging out with some friends. And what's it called? And my friend was actually inviting his family who were visiting from abroad. So they took us out. We had a wonderful dinner together. And we were having some wine, and then we were having some beer, and then we were having some more wine. The day started around 3 p.m. It ended around 4 a.m. And I got home, and when I got home, I remember that story about Christopher Hitchens. And I was like, if he can do it, I gotta do it.
For sure.
So I started writing, and I didn't think, I just wrote. And I wrote maybe, I don't know, the story is about 7,000 words or something. Closed the computer, went to bed, woke up the next day, read it with, fresh eyes. And I was like, okay, this is not as horrible as I thought it would be. But that's also when I realized I was writing a magical realism story. It was a story about a billboard that is showing the tragedies of the world. And the main character in the story does not want to see it. It's like, I have enough problems in my world, in my life. Why do I have to care about what's going on in the world?
Yeah.
So one night he goes up and like paints the whole billboard black. And then he's very happy with himself. He goes home, and the next day on his way to work, he sees the billboard clean, good as new, like nothing happened. And he's, of course, very pissed off because it frustrates him that he has to see this and enjoy this. So the next night, he literally douses the whole thing with kerosene and gasoline and burns the billboard. And then, very happy, goes to bed. Next day, when on his way to work, he sees the billboard there again, clean, good as new. And that is the basic idea of the story. But I thought, but when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking I'm going to write a magical realism story. That just sort of came out in a drunken stupor, in a sense. And after that, I just started experimenting more and more, and I read more and more magical realism. And now a lot of what I write is magical realism. One short story that I'm working on right now is about a grandmother who goes to bed, who is about to passes away, and then comes back to life because her grandson is calling and she hasn't said goodbye. And she can't say goodbye because he's abroad and he needs a visa to come back to the country. And there's a whole bureaucratic situation. So she goes to the visa office like, I gotta die. Could you just give me the visa, But yeah, that's sort of, now I guess it's more magical realism that I write. And the next novel I'm writing is also very magical realism.
Okay. Let me come to my last question because we have spoken quite a bit. But let me try to slightly broaden this. So all of these stories that you base your books on, right? The myths, the demons, the monsters, the heroes. To me, it seems like you have heard them from, let's say, your mom, your grandmom, your family members, so on and so forth. And that was the case for me too. Most of the mythology that I came across as a kid was from my grandma. But I feel mythology also has taken another space where it is, as you said, used to build identity. And this has happened as well in India, my home country, where the heroes that we looked up to have now been sort of nationalized. And I'm not trying to put here a bad or good, like a normative uh, value to this, but it is unquestionable that mythologies are used for identity building as well, and which is obviously a very different understanding of it when you compare it with, let's say, us as kids listening to our grandma in our covers while going to sleep. So, tell us more about uh, Kurdish identity and mythology, because at some point, I'm sure an identity which has been, in quotation marks, fractured over so long, and has been trying to reinvent itself over the last 10, 20 years or more. Um, has it used these mythologies as a tool, as a means of building such an identity?
I mean, yeah, of course. One of the stories that I recall right now is in 1943 or something. There was a play put on in Baghdad, and it was sponsored, or it was in part organized by the Iraqi Communist Party and as well as the Kurdistan Democratic Party at the time under the leadership of Mustafa Barzani. And they put on a play in Baghdad. And again, can't remember the year exactly. It was somewhere in the 1940s. They put on a play of Noros, the story of Noros, about how these people were under the tyranny of Zuhak, this tyrant king who had snakes growing out of his shoulders, and every day he would come into the village, take children, and feed their brains to the snakes, right? And in that play, funny enough, also one of the founders of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, PUK, Jalal Talabani, was also an actor, I believe, in that play. So, at least in South Kurdistan, I know that story, and Nodos was used not just in South Kurdistan, but also in North Kurdistan, in Kurdistan in Turkey, in Rojava in Kurdistan in Syria, in Rojava in Kurdistan in Iran. The story of Nodos became the symbol of the Kurdish nation fighting against this tyranny, freeing themselves. There's other stories that go away from politics and more work towards building a united Kurdish identity. So Shamaran is one of those stories. Shamaran, despite not exactly being a political story, of course, you can also argue for it being political the way it talks about kings and the rulers, but that is also a story that almost every Kurd knows, even if they don't know the exact details or they have heard how different variations of the story. It is something that is okay. This is Kurdish. This makes us Kurdish, right? Um, Other mythologies as well. So it is different from the way we heard stories growing up, right? But maybe in a sense, we can also think of it as, for example, the Avengers and Marvel's stories, right? Because a lot of kids growing up reading comic books, whether DC or Marvel, they weren't reading about, Captain America and the fight against communism, right? They were reading about this hero who looks like them, who speaks like them.
Yeah.
It and makes them feel like, okay, I can also be this hero. And then we grow up and we realize, of course, there's political undertones to everything, and that was not always intentional, but it's there. Actually, that reminds me of like when I was a kid. I remember maybe I was like 12 or something, and this is before I knew the intricacies of Kurdish politics all that much. Of course, every kid grows up knowing it, but I one day I picked up this American geography book, and I was looking at the four countries where Kurdistan is, and I got onto Iraq, and it said official languages Kurdish, Arabic.
Mhm.
And to my 12-year-old brain, that was like, whoa, the Americans know we exist. Like, of course, there was like the invasion of Iraq before that, but still, like seeing
Yeah.
it published, written, printed, it was like, oh my God, we exist to these people too. And that, just seeing that made me feel my own existence more. And it's the same with these mythological stories. This
Yeah.
hero who speaks like you, who looks like you, who dresses like you can also be that hero.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Shil. I think that's excellent note to end on. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing with me the first few pages of your book, and thank you for sharing with us the ideas, what went into your book. And I think it was a very good insight into Kurdish mythology and how it helps. And for that, we are very happy to have this. We look forward to your book being published and reading it as well. But yeah, until then, I wish you all the best with your book, with this book as well as all the ones that are on their way.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Of course. Thank you, Jîl. Bye-bye.
Bye.